guys, hello, welcome to my channel. Today we're going to be doing a tier ranking video of all of the books that I read in 2024, which was 100 exactly. That being said, I don't actually have the full 100 on my little tier ranking thing because when it comes to a series, for the most part, I didn't add every single book in the series. I just added that first book, because in general, I kind of rate them as a whole instead of by individual book. That being said, there are certain books in some series that do stand out more than others, whether for a good reason or a bad reason. So in those cases, I have kind of added those specific books. And I will be ranking all of the books into 6 different categories. The first one, our bottom of the barrel tier, is not for me. These are gonna be books that I like DNF'd or just didn't really like. They're gonna be kind of like in the 1-star territory. Our second tier is I read it, and very plain and simply, they're books that I read. That's about all I can say about them. Then our third tier is She Was Okay, and these are books that were okay. These are our 3 stars. They're ones that I enjoyed, but like I don't really ever think about them, and I probably wouldn't recommend them just because it wouldn't be the first book that popped into my head. And then our fourth tier is one that I kind of added because I felt like there needed to be something in between She Was Okay and the 5th tier, which is thoroughly enjoyed, would recommend. These are ones that I really enjoyed and I definitely would recommend them. And last year, if I remember correctly, those two were like right on top of each other, and I felt like there needed to be something in between that. So this year we added Yes Please, which are basically books that I really enjoyed and I would probably recommend. These are going to be in between like 3 to 4 stars. And then going back up to our thoroughly enjoyed, would recommend. Those are definite 4 stars, probably even some 5 stars in there as well. And then our very last tier, our cream of the crop, is Can't Stop Thinking About It, because these are books that I literally cannot stop thinking about. They are my favorites of the year. I love them and I want everyone else to read them as well. And I did put all of the books in the general order that I read them in. Let's go ahead and get started with our first read for 2024, which was The 7-Year Slip. This is a book by Ashley Poston, which after this book, she became an auto-buy author for me because I absolutely loved this book. It wasn't like I can't stop thinking about it, but it was definitely a thoroughly enjoyed, would recommend. Next up we have Nightbane by Alex Astor. This is the second book in the Lightlark series, and Lightlark, if I remember correctly, last year I gave like 5 stars. I really loved that. Nightbane, however, was not my favorite. I liked the story, but I feel like the romance was like agitating to me. Not that it wasn't good, but it's basically a love triangle, and love triangles are not my favorite because I always feel bad for people, or I get irritated when it's not going the way that I want it to go. I think I'm gonna put it in Yes Please, because I am still very excited about the series. This one in particular, though, just like was not my favorite. It was just a frustrating read for me. Next up, we have Under the Whispering Door, and this is gonna go into not for me because this is, I think, one of only 2 books that I DNF'd this year. I originally soft DNF'd it with the intent of picking it back up again at some point because it was cute. I was enjoying it. I got like 100 pages in, but that was the 3rd book that I picked up this year, and I have not picked it up since. And it's been a whole year since then, so I don't think I'm gonna ever pick that one up again. Next up, we got Throne of the Fallen by Carrie Maniscalco. This is the first book in a spin-off series of Kingdom of the Wicked. I was absolutely obsessed with Kingdom of the Wicked the year before. It was one of my top favorite reads. I have literally talked about that series so much, and this spin-off series I was also just so excited for and so obsessed with. That being said, it wasn't my most favorite read of the year. I definitely enjoyed it. It was kind of slow getting into, but I definitely enjoyed it overall. And this one was about my favorite prince from the Kingdom of the Wicked series, the one that I was like the most interested in. So that was really fun for me. Next up we have Crossed. And I'm gonna put that one in I read it. I feel really bad putting it in that category because I have been having a really good time with the Never After series in general. This is the 5th book in the Never After series. They're basically like dark romances, modern day dark romances that are kind of inspired by Disney movies. I didn't like the male love interest. He was just icky to me. So this one just was not my favorite. Next up we have Blood and Honey, but this is also going to be one of those situations where I put the series together. So this is basically the Serpent and Dove series as a whole. I loved Serpent and Dove. That's the first book in the series. This one, Blood and Honey, is the second, and then Gods and Monsters, I think, is what the 3rd one's called. I think I actually gave the first book in that series a 4-star, but after reading the entire series, it's definitely, I think, a can't stop thinking about it. And kind of piggybacking off of that, we're gonna skip ahead in the list just a little bit to The Scarlet Veil, which is the first book in a spin-off series for Serpent and Dove. This one is about one of kind of like the B-roll characters, if you will, of Serpent and Dove, and it was honestly one that I wasn't the most fond of in that original series, so I was kind of nervous going into The Scarlet Veil, but I ended up really, really loving it. And this one specifically is about vampires. And I'm gonna go ahead and also put that, honestly, in Can't Stop Thinking About, because actually, you know what? I think I might put it in Thoroughly Enjoyed Would Recommend. I don't know if it's like a top tier series. Does that mean I should put Serpent and Dove down into Thoroughly Enjoyed Would Recommend as well? Because I did like the series, like both of the original and the spinoff, kind of the same. Sorry. We're gonna actually put the Serpent and Dove series down into Thoroughly Enjoyed Would Recommend as well. I'm thinking about other books and series that I've read later on in the year, and Serpent and Dove I don't think exactly matches the love that I have for those, but I still really, really love that series. Anyway, there's that. Next up we have To Kill a Shadow, and I'm gonna go ahead and put that one in She Was Okay. She was okay. It was really interesting for the first like half of the book. I was totally invested, and then it just kind of like went stagnant a little bit. This one was described as being a horror fantasy, which I've never read those two kind of like genres together, and the horror elements were definitely the parts that I thought were the most fun and the most unique. So hopefully with the next book, the story amps back up. Next up we have Savage Lover by Sophie Lark, which I believe is the third book in the Brutal Birthrights series. I'm gonna be honest, this series as a whole like started out really strong, and it's just kind of like petered out as I've read each book. I think I'm gonna put Savage Lover in She Was Okay. And then we also have Bloody Heart, which I read way later in the year, and I'm gonna be honest, I cannot remember for the life of me what this book is about, so I'm gonna look it up really quick to refresh my memory. That's right. Yeah, I think I'm just gonna put them both in She Was Okay. This is one where I should have just had one book to represent the series as a whole, because as of right now, we're just standing at a She Was Okay. Moving on to a series that actually is my favorite, but I do actually have 3 different books to kind of represent my feelings about the series. First of all, we have Powerless, which is the 3rd book in the Chestnut Springs series. I feel like that one's a lot of people's favorites, but for me personally, it was my least favorite of the series. And that one is going to go into Yes Please. I still liked it, but it was my least favorite, and I just kind of wanted to mention that. Next we have Reckless, which was one of my favorites. So that is going into Can't Stop Thinking About It, which is our first one in this category. Reckless and Heartless, by far, are my favorite of the series. They were so good. And then we have Hopeless, which is the last book in that series, and I'm gonna put that one in Thoroughly Enjoyed Would Recommend. That's kind of where the series as a whole, and also just like the majority of the books, kind of land. Next up we have a couple of books from the Neon Gods series, which is by Katie Robert, and this is kind of more of a smut kind of series. It's a series that's kind of inspired by Greek mythology, but in a modern kind of like mafia style world. Did not think that that was something that I was gonna like going into it, but I've ended up really enjoying the series. Pretty sure I've read all of the ones that are currently published. I think it's supposed to be like a 10-book series, and I think there's 6 or 7 books out right now. But I do only have 2 to kind of represent my thoughts on the books. First of all, we have Electric Idol, which is the 2nd book in the series and has my favorite cover out of all of them. This one we're gonna go into Thoroughly Enjoyed Would Recommend. I really enjoyed this series. It's one of those series that also kind of gets better and better as you go, because each book kind of talks about its own specific couple, but as the story progresses, you get more and more backstory and the world kind of gets more and more developed. And then I do have Wicked Beauty as well from this series, which I think is the 3rd book in the series, and this one I'm gonna put in Can't Stop Thinking About because it was definitely my favorite of all of the books. It's the 1st book in the series that has a why choose kind of situation in it, and those are definitely my favorite, or like a throuple. And when it comes to smut, I've said this so many times, but a why choose, a reverse harem, anything that's more than 2 people for whatever reason is like my favorite. It just gives me very like found family vibes, and I love it. Next up we have another spicy book. We have Bride by Ali Hazelwood. Initially after reading it, I would have definitely put it in Can't Stop Thinking About It because I was absolutely obsessed with this book after I was done with it. But now that some time has passed and I've read some more books, I think I'm just gonna go ahead and put it in Thoroughly Enjoyed Would Recommend because I definitely enjoyed it and I would definitely recommend it. I think it was a lot of fun. But that being said, a lot of time has passed and I don't really remember too much of what happened in that book, so I feel like it can't really go into the top tier, you know? Next up we have Foxglove by Adeline Grace. This is the 2nd book in the Belladonna series, and this one we're gonna put into Yes Please. I definitely liked this one a little bit more than Belladonna, but it wasn't like my most favorite book of the year, but it was definitely still a good time. Next up we have Butcher and Blackbird and Leather and Lark, and this is another one that I probably could have just did one book for the series because I liked them both about the same, which I'm gonna put into Thoroughly Enjoyed Would Recommend. Actually, you know what? We're gonna put Butcher and Blackbird and Thoroughly Enjoyed Would Recommend, and then Leather and Lark into Yes Please, because I liked the romance definitely in Butcher and Blackbird more, but I kind of liked the overall story I think a little bit more in Leather and Lark, but I still also really enjoyed the story in Butcher and Blackbird. I don't know if that makes any sense, but that's what we're doing. Next up we have Haunting Adeline, and we're putting that one in not for me. Should I put it in not for me or I read it? Kind of glancing over my list, I feel like I'm not gonna have a whole lot in these bottom two tiers. I honestly had such a good reading year. Like, I liked the majority of what I read. So there's not gonna be a whole lot in these bottom ones. I'm kind of toggling between putting it in not for me or I read it, because I definitely did read it. I read the whole thing. But after kind of getting halfway through Hunting Adeline, I know I'm probably not going to read anything else from this author. The storyline was not my favorite. The romance was not my favorite. So purely because I'm not going to read anything else from this author, I'm going to go ahead and put it in not for me. Next up we have Red Rising, and I do have all 3 books in the original trilogy because it was kind of a journey with reading that series. Right off the bat, Red Rising, going straight into Can't Stop Thinking About It. I had a really good time reading this series, specifically this first book. So good. It literally has everything that I love about books. And it was also just like really clever. That being said, Golden Sun I'm going to put into thoroughly enjoyed, would recommend. And that's kind of where I'm placing the series as a whole. I really enjoyed it, but it wasn't like top tier like that first book was. The first book was definitely my favorite. I literally think I rated them like 5, 4, and 3 stars. The first one was so good. Second one was also really good. Third one, we're going to put it into Yes Please. Actually, we're gonna put the third one in She Was Okay. There was definitely certain parts of that book that I really enjoyed, but overall, I just feel like I was reading that book for so long. Like the first 2 I blew through, and that third one took me a while, I feel like, to get through. So it was not my favorite. But again, overall, I do feel like that series is super good. Definitely would recommend. Next up we have Assistant to the Villain, and this was such a fun read. And I'm gonna go ahead and put it into Yes Please, because yes please, give me some more. I want to read this entire series. It's such a cute, fun, like lighthearted, sarcastic read. And I'm also going to go ahead and put Apprentice to the Villain in that one as well. This is another one where I didn't really need to put both of the books on here because they're clearly going into the same category. But I will say I did like Assistant to the Villain a little bit more than I liked Apprentice to the Villain. I am someone that really enjoys the build-up of a story. I like kind of getting to know the characters. I like them kind of interacting for the first time together. I like the beginning stages of the world being built. So the first book in a series almost always is my favorite, which I feel like is kind of like the opposite of a lot of other people. Most people kind of think that kind of stuff is boring, and they like when it gets kind of like more action and more crazy and stuff. But that's when I lose interest sometimes with stories, because it just gets too far off of what that first book was. Next up we have A Door in the Dark, and this was kind of a book that I picked up very randomly on a whim, and I ended up really enjoying it. I'm gonna put that one also in Yes Please. Actually, you know what? We're gonna put that one in Thoroughly Enjoyed, would recommend. And then the second book, A Whisper in the Walls, we're gonna put that one into Yes Please, because I definitely, again, I liked that first book a little bit more than the second one. The second one had a lot more politics in it. Like the first one had not really a trial aspect, but it was a group of students had to like survive in the woods with like limited magic and stuff like that. So there was like a little bit of like a trial-esque type of feel. But then we have the second book, which is like the aftermath of them surviving and whatnot. And it's a lot more political. Wasn't my favorite, but I still really enjoyed it. And I definitely am going to continue the series. I think the third book comes out either this month or next month, which I just found out about a couple of days ago. Very excited. Next up, we have The Assassin's Blade. I think I'm going to go ahead and put this one in Yes Please. Basically in this book you're getting the backstory of the main character for Throne of Glass, but it was kind of hard. Like I was really impatient while reading it because I just wanted to get to Throne of Glass. It wasn't like the most important information in the world, to be honest, until that last story. That last story is crucial in my opinion, at least with Throne of Glass, which we have next. And I'm gonna go ahead and put that one in Thoroughly Enjoyed, would recommend. And that's kind of how I feel with the series as of right now. I'm not done with it yet. I'm on Empire of Storms. I haven't started it yet, but that's on my TBR for the month. And then next up we have Expiration Dates, and that's gonna go straight into I Read It. This one had such a good sounding concept, but it was kind of boring. I knew what was gonna happen pretty early on in the story, and it was a lot more kind of like a Hallmarky type of vibe, which is not really my favorite. Next up we have The Housemaid, and this is gonna go into She Was Okay. She was okay. I think this one honestly failed for me because of all of the hype that it has. I was just expecting so much more from it, and it was just okay. Next up we have Off to the Races by Elsie Silver, and this is gonna go into Thoroughly Enjoyed, would recommend. This series actually came out before Chestnut Springs, and for whatever reason, Chestnut Springs gets a lot of hype, but this one really does not. This one's about like a horse ranch, and it's a little bit more heartfelt than Chestnut Springs, and the series as a whole I do feel like is a Thoroughly Enjoyed, would recommend. That being said, we also have The Front Runner, which is the third book in the series. And this one is going straight into Can't Stop Thinking About It because this one was so good. Specifically because I think this one involved like the villain of the story. He's obviously not a villain because these are not like fantasy books, but kind of like the guy that is misunderstood. So it's got him, and then the female character is a veterinarian, which is one of like the first jobs when I was a kid that I was like, that's what I want to do, until I realized exactly what kind of that job entails. I'm not good with blood, but I feel like if I could handle it, it would be like a really fulfilling job, and I would love to do that. Yeah, and you actually got quite a bit of like veterinarian kind of stuff going on, so it was kind of a fun read. Next up we have Betting on You by Lynn Painter, and where are we gonna put you? I think I'm gonna put that one in Yes Please. I'm gonna be honest, I don't remember a whole lot about this book, but Lynn Painter is a guaranteed good time for me. I love all of her books. There's literally not a single one that I have rated less than 4 stars, and actually we do have one other Lynn Painter book that I'm going to go ahead and just grab out of here, which is Happily Never After. And this one is going to go into Thoroughly Enjoyed, Would Recommend. I think this is honestly one of my favorite adult ones that she does. She kind of comes out with one adult and one YA book every year. Yeah, this was the adult one. I feel like other people didn't really enjoy this one as much as I did, but I don't know, I thought it was a good time. Next up we have A Fate Inked in Blood. This one I'm going to go ahead and put into Yes Please. The first half of this book would have been probably, honestly, I can't stop thinking about it. It was really good. Like, I really loved the first half of this book, but then the second half just kind of like dwindled for me a little bit. I feel like the romance kind of killed it a little bit for me because it happened really quickly. So there wasn't a whole lot of room for tension to grow, and I feel like if they had have given that a little bit longer, let it burn a little bit slower, it would have been a lot better. Next up we have Pucking Around. And I'm gonna put that one also in Yes Please. This is a Why Choose hockey romance. It was my first ever, and I think still only, sports romance that I've ever read. And I actually really enjoyed it, surprisingly. I'm not a big sports person at all, but I will say I really did enjoy the kind of Why Choose aspect because the members of the relationship were members on the team, and I liked that. It was just like an extra layer of a relationship. So it definitely will not be the last sports romance that I read. Also too though, one other thing that I will say that kind of knocked it down a little bit in the rating is it was really long. This is like a 700 something page book, which actually, again, that being said, we're gonna jump ahead in the books a little bit and take out the fine print. This one I'm gonna put into Okay. This is another one that I feel like suffered a little bit because it was just so long. The overall idea of the series is really intriguing to me, and I am definitely gonna continue it. And I did enjoy the plot in general for this book. I liked the characters, I liked the plot, I liked the setting. The setting was really fun. It's kind of like a Disneyland-esque type of situation, but the story just in general just dragged on and on and on. So it was a little long for me. Next up we have Caraval by Stephanie Garber. And this one we're also going to put into She Was Okay. I feel like I've said this so many times recently, but I loved the setting, I loved the plot, I loved the characters of this book, but for whatever reason, while I was actually physically reading the book, I was enjoying it decently enough, but every time I put it down, I did not care at all to pick it back up. Next up we have Not in Love by Allie Hazelwood, and I don't know if this should be in Can't Stop Thinking About It or Thoroughly Enjoyed Would Recommend. I think it should go in Thoroughly Enjoyed Would Recommend. It was really good. I really loved it, especially because it was a little bit different. Like it had a different vibe than your typical romance, but it's not like I can't stop thinking about it. I can stop. Next up we have Ice Planet Barbarians, and this one is going and Can't Stop Thinking About It. I am obsessed with this series. It is so good. It's basically alien smut. Some human women get abducted, but the ship ends up crashing on a different planet, and they find these ice planet barbarians, and it's kind of got like a fated mate kind of situation. They're just like fun, quick, smutty books, and I really enjoyed them. All of them so far. I will say the first one is definitely my favorite because of, again, you have the aspect of like building up the story. You're getting to know this ice planet, the barbarians, the aliens. You're kind of getting to know them for the first time, but specifically the first human and the first alien have obviously a language barrier, and that made the romance so much better. I don't know what it was about it, but I loved it. Next up we have The Word is Murder by Anthony Horowitz, and this one we're gonna go into She Was Okay. This one surprised me in the sense that I liked it more than I thought I was going to, but I didn't like it enough to like continue the series. Next up we have Smoke Gets in Your Eyes, and this is my one and only nonfiction of the year. I had made a goal last year to read 5 nonfictions. This one I started in 2023, so basically I didn't even read a full nonfiction. I just finished one. But that being said, I did actually really enjoy this. It's basically about the author's job as a cremation technician. She cremates people, basically. So it is kind of morbid, but I really enjoyed the way that she wrote the book. She didn't make it sad or like gross. It was just kind of, I don't know, interesting. So I think I'm gonna put that one in yes please. I did enjoy it, and I do have another book from her that I will definitely be reading, maybe this year, who knows. I've set myself a goal again to read nonfiction, but this time only 3. Next up we have I Hope This Finds You Well, and this one was so good. This one is definitely going into thoroughly enjoyed, would recommend. Actually, you know what? We're gonna bump that into Can't Stop Thinking About It. This was such a good book, and I have thought about it so often. I just thought it was a lot of fun. The Office is one of my favorite shows, and this very much has the vibes of that. It's just kind of like about a woman's life working at an office that's kind of dysfunctional, or she's kind of dysfunctional in a way, and it was just so good. There's a little tiny bit of romance as well. Next up we have a novel love story by Ashley Poston. This one is gonna go in She Was Okay, sadly. We started off our year with 7 Year Slip by this author. The year before that I read The Dead Romantics, which I absolutely loved. So this one I was so excited for, especially because of what it was about, but it was really hard for me to kind of like connect or care about the characters, and I feel like that's really important. So I didn't love it. Next up we have Life of the Party, and this is actually a poetry book, and I'm also gonna put that in She Was Okay. It had a very different tone than I thought it was going to, with it being called The Life of the Party. And also what I remembered from the synopsis was that it was about girlhood kind of growing into womanhood kind of a thing. So I thought it was gonna be like a fun summer read. No, it basically is about like the traumas and hardships of being a girl and a woman. So not what I was looking for. But that being said, I did enjoy it, and the poems were good. I liked them. Next up we have Half-Blood by Jennifer L. Armentrout, and this is the first book in the Covenant series. I have the entire series. I've only read up to the 3rd book so far, and I'm gonna put it into yes please. As I was reading it, it probably would have gone into thoroughly enjoyed, would recommend, and I definitely would recommend this series for sure. But now that some time has passed, I've chosen other things over continuing that series, so I don't think it could fully go into our second category. So it's gonna go into yes please. Next up we have House Across the Lake by Riley Sager, and this one is also gonna go into She Was Okay. I wasn't blown away by this. The thing that I heard the most about this book in particular is how crazy the ending was. So I was just kind of like waiting for the end to see what this crazy twist was. And it was a very bizarre twist. Did not expect it at all. And I did enjoy the story, but it like wasn't my most favorite. So it's gonna go in She Was Okay. Next up we have The Golden Spoon, and that is definitely going into yes please. I had such a good time with this one. I listened to it on audio. There was different narrators for the characters. It's basically about a murder that happens during the filming of a show very similar to The Great British Bake Off, which I absolutely love that show. So I was a really good time. Next up we have I Am Still Alive, and that one is also gonna go into yes please. Hatchet was one of my favorite books as a kid, and this is kind of like an adult version of that. Next up we have Survive the Night, also by Riley Sager, and this one we're gonna go into yes please as well. I definitely enjoyed this one more than House Across the Lake, which is kind of funny because I've heard both good and bad things about House Across the Lake, but I've heard almost nothing but bad things about Survive the Night. So I think going into that one, I wasn't expecting as much, I guess, maybe, but I really enjoyed it. And then we have Lore Olympus, which is a graphic novel about Hades and Persephone, and this one is gonna go into thoroughly enjoyed, would recommend. I almost am putting it and Can't Stop Thinking About It because it is one that I think about often, but I think it's just because more so it surprised me. I don't know, I've read like a couple other graphic novels and they were just kind of like whatever kind of things to me. So I wasn't really expecting much from this one other than the fact that I like Hades and Persephone retellings. So I figured I would at least like that aspect of it. But this was so cute and so fun. Next up we have The Veiled Kingdom by Holly Renee, and we're gonna put this one also very sadly in She Was Okay. A Novel Love Story and The Veiled Kingdom were 2 of like my most anticipated reads for 2024, and they were both kind of disappointing. I read another series from her the year before and I really enjoyed that one, so I was super excited for this one, but it just wasn't my jam. The overall storyline I'm excited for, but it's the romance that kind of like killed it for me. So I'm hoping as we get into the series more, that kind of goes in a direction that I like more. Next up we have Quicksilver by Callie Hart, and this one is definitely going in Can't Stop Thinking About because this is definitely one of my favorite reads of the year. Anytime I read a book that has like tons and tons of hype, 9 times out of 10 it does not live up to the expectations that I put on it. This one, however, met all of my expectations. And speaking of, another book series that I was super obsessed with is Spark of the Everflame. I absolutely devoured the first 3 books in this series. This time specifically was such a good reading streak because I read Quicksilver, I read Spark of the Everflame, and then I also read Phantasma, which is another one that's gonna go straight into Can't Stop Thinking About It. From October through the rest of the year, this is when I read some of my most favorite books of the entire year. I ended off the year strong. Next up we have Wrong Place, Wrong Time, and this one I'm gonna put in She Was Okay. I'm not really the biggest thriller reader, so take my thriller recommendations or thoughts with a grain of salt. Also listen to this one on audio. It's basically about a woman who sees her son murder someone, and her son gets like arrested and everything. It's like a whole ordeal. And then she goes to bed, but the next morning when she wakes up, it's the day before he committed the murder. And every time she goes to bed, she wakes up farther and farther in the past. And it was really, really cool concept. And also it went way farther in the past than I thought it was going to. Almost to the point where it got a little annoying. Like I was like, can we wrap this up already? Actually, you know what? We're gonna put it into Yes Please. I did really enjoy it. Next up we have Slewfoot, and that one is also going into Yes Please. I was pretty much pissed off the entire time I was reading this book, but it was really good. And there is really cool illustrations in it as well. So that's definitely a bonus. Next up we have Lights Out, and this is another Can't Stop Thinking About It because I absolutely cannot stop thinking about this book. I loved the characters, specifically Josh, the male love interest, the one doing the stalking. Loved him. The 2 previous books that I read earlier in the year that had kind of stalker situations, I didn't really end up enjoying. As a matter of fact, they're both in the bottom 2 tiers, Crossed and Haunting Adeline. So I was thoroughly convinced that I just did not like stalker romances until Lights Out came about. Next up we have My Vampire Plus One, and this is kind of like a follow-up to My Neighbor is a Vampire or something of that nature. And this one is going to go into She Was Okay. I read the first book in this series in 2023 in October as just kind of like a fun, lighthearted Halloween read. Did the same thing with this one in 2024. It did its job. A different paranormal romance though that I read right after this one I would recommend. We have The Fake Mate by Lana Ferguson, and this one I'm gonna go into Yes Please. Just kidding. We're gonna go into Thoroughly Enjoyed, would recommend. This one's a romance between 2 wolf shifters that are both doctors. It was a good time. I really liked it. And jumping ahead in our book list, we have another book by Lana Ferguson that I also really liked. But this one is going to go into Yes Please. It is Under Lock and Key, which was a Loch Ness Monster shifter romance. So random, but so good. Specifically because it wasn't even just about the dude being a Loch Ness Monster shifter. There was like a little bit of a mystery and some magic and stuff involved, and it was just really fun. So there's that one. Next up we have Long Live Evil. When I say this is one of my favorite books of the year, this was one of my favorite books of the year. This is obviously going into Can't Stop Thinking About It. This one is basically about a girl who ends up being the villain in her favorite fantasy novel romance series, and it was just so good. Specifically, I think because of the overall tone of the story was very kind of, doesn't take itself too seriously. It was kind of fun, very humorous, and I love that. But then also just the relationships that the female lead ended up making throughout the story was just some of my favorites. One of them specifically literally kept me up at night. I loved it. Next up we have Split and Swallow, and this one is gonna go into, I feel like it needs to go in the middle of like She Was Okay and Yes Please. We're gonna just go Yes Please. This is a smutty book that I'm not going to tell you anything about because the thing that drew me to it was the fact that the synopsis was basically a note from the author saying you should go into it blind. Next up we have The Love of My Afterlife, and this one is a weird one because I do remember really liking it, but I haven't really thought much of it since I read it. But I actually left a review for this one that just says, I laughed, I cried. So it's not like a very in-depth review by any means, but I really only leave reviews on Goodreads when I really like a book or I really don't. So it's funny to me that I ended up feeling strongly enough about this book to leave a review, as short as it is, because I really don't remember this book that much. But apparently I laughed and I cried. And the more that I think about it, I do remember a little bit of the plot. So I am going to go ahead and put that in Yes Please. Anything higher than that, purely because I can't really remember it, just doesn't make sense. So moving on, we have The Other Side, and this one, I'm gonna go ahead and put this one in Yes Please as well. This was like the perfect kind of like fall read because it's basically like a murder mystery and a romance, which was a very interesting mix. I don't think I've ever read a book that had those 2 things specifically together. The romance was good and the twist surprised me, which, I mean, looking back, like after it happened, I'm like, I should have guessed that, but I didn't. And then moving on, we have Bonded by Thorns. this series, you guys, had me in a chokehold. This series is definitely a can't stop thinking about it. I read the first 4 books in the series. I think there's a 5th one that is supposed to come out at some point this year, I'm hoping. This is another Why Choose. It's a Beauty and the Beast kind of retelling with the Fae. There's basically one beauty and a bunch of beasts, and it is just great, especially because each of the princes are kind of associated with different seasons, and that little like addition was really fun as well. So it's just a really good time. Next up we have The Island, which was another thriller, and we're gonna put that one in She's Okay. I also listened to this one on audio. I think thrillers are like my thing for audiobooks. I tried listening to Clockwork Angel, which we'll get to in a second. I tried listening to that one on audio and it was good, but at the same time I feel like the world building or the different like specifics about the magic system and things like that were kind of getting lost because I would tune in and out of it. But then also that one, the narrator, was kind of hard for me to not take seriously, but like it was a woman that did the narration for all of it, but she would change her voice sometimes, and anytime she changed her voice it made the person sound like it was like an old lady or an old man, and these people are like 17, and there is like a little bit of a romance element to it, and I knew that I wouldn't be able to get into the romance the way I wanted to because it would seem like a 17-year-old is having a romance with like a 90-year-old. You know what I mean? It just, the narration was not doing it for me. And once I did switch over to the book, I got really sucked into the story and it went a lot quicker. Anyway, point being, thrillers, I think as of right now, are really the only thing that I can listen to on audio and actually like enjoy it. That being said, this one was still not my favorite. It's basically about these influencers that get an all expenses paid like trip to this island that has like an amusement park on it before it's kind of like open to the public, and they start getting murdered. It sounds so good, and it was so good for the majority of the book, but after a while it kind of just, I don't know, I felt like it was going on and on and on, and I got a little bored after a while. Like I kept listening because I wanted to know who did it kind of a thing, but like I had checked out. And then since we talked about Clockwork Angel, we'll go ahead and do that one, which as of right now I think I'm going to put it in thoroughly enjoyed, would recommend. I'm definitely enjoying that series. I'm on the 2nd book currently. I'm like halfway through it. It's getting better and better. Next up we have Sweet Dark, and that one's gonna go into not for me. This is a poetry book and all of the poems just went over my head. I didn't understand what she was talking about. It wasn't my thing. Then we have The Pumpkin Spice Cafe, and this one is gonna go into She Was Okay. I feel like this book got so much hype during the fall and it just kind of fell flat for me. The romance was decent and the story was cute. Like it's very much a cute, cozy kind of read, but also it had spice in it, which personally, I do love spice. Literally the majority of my Can't Stop Thinking About It category is full of spicy books. I love spice, but in this book specifically, it just felt out of place because it is a very cozy, cutesy story, and then all of a sudden they're like doing it and you're like, what is happening? And then also too, just like the general plot around the story was very flimsy in my opinion. Like there barely was a plot. That being said, the next book in the series, The Cinnamon Bun Bookstore, that one I think I would give a yes please. That one I had a really good time with. I feel like had more of a plot, which I really enjoyed, and it allowed the romance to kind of build a little bit before spice started happening. And right after that, I started getting into my Christmassy season books. So we have Talk Santa to Me, which was such a cute, unexpected book. This one is definitely gonna go into yes please. It was a sweet little story. There was no spice in it, but there was like a little bit of a romance. It is YA. And then we read Filthy Rich Vampires. This one is going into thoroughly enjoyed, would recommend. I definitely enjoyed that one. I love anything to do with vampires at this point, especially if they're romancy and spicy. And I will be probably reading the next book in that series within the next couple of months. Back to our Christmas reads, we have My December Darling by Lauren Asher. This is like a little Christmas novella. Honestly, I'm gonna put this in, I read it because I'm a little bitter. This takes place during the holiday season, but it literally had nothing to do with Christmas and there was hardly any references to it, so it was annoying to me. Then I moved on to How My Neighbor Stole Christmas by Megan Quinn, and this one is definitely gonna go into either yes please or thoroughly enjoyed, would recommend. I think I'm gonna go with thoroughly enjoyed, would recommend, because I feel like it has a really fun, unique plot. It's very Grinch coded and Christmas coded. It was the Christmas vibe that I was looking for, so I was very, very excited to get that finally. I think I ended up finishing it the day of Christmas or the day after Christmas or something like that. Like it came in just in time. And now finally the last couple of books that we squeezed in at the end of 2024, we have Serpent and the Wings of Night, and that is gonna go in, I was gonna say definitely go in Can't Stop Thinking About It, but I think I'm actually gonna go more so thoroughly enjoyed, would recommend. You know what? No. we're gonna go and can't stop thinking about it. I really, really liked this series. The first book specifically does kind of revolve around a competition that our main character goes into, which I love our main character. She's a human that lives in like the vampire world, and she's trying to like win this vampire competition basically to like get some respect. And she meets someone while she's in the competition. It's just so good. And then kind of following that up, the last thing that I read was 6 Scorched Roses. This one I'm gonna put in thoroughly enjoyed, would recommend. This is a novella that you read in between the first and second book in the, I think it's called the Nyaxia series. It basically gives you a little bit of a backstory between a character that appears in the second book. And I'm gonna be honest, with the fact that he had his own novella, I assumed he was gonna be a bigger part in the second book, and he wasn't really. And I'm really, really hoping that this couple gets their own little duet. Female character specifically in that little novella, I absolutely love. She's kind of got like a weird, quirky, awkward kind of energy, and that's becoming like one of my favorites. I just find it so endearing. And just in general, I think it's funny when characters are like super blunt. I don't know, I really loved her. So I hope we see more of her because she was almost not in the second book at all. Anyway, with that, that is my entire tier list. As you can see, the majority of the books are within those top 3 tiers, which I do feel like I'm learning more about what I like. I mean, honestly, this year, it could be seen as a good thing or a bad thing, but I didn't really take any risks. I very much stuck to what I love and what I know, which is romance and fantasy romance. That being said, I definitely do want to take a few more risks this year. I've definitely got some reading goals that I've been kind of like working through. And I do plan on doing a video at some point this month, kind of talking more through my goals. So I'm gonna leave it at that because that's not what this video is about. If you've made it this far into the video, let me know in the comments down below what your favorite and your least favorite book for 2024 was. And with that, I hope you guys have had the most amazing of days, and I will hopefully see you in my next one. Bye.